Hey, welcome everybody. My name is Mark Berninger. I'm the Natural Resource Manager for the City of San Diego. I work in our Open Space Division, which is a part of our Parks and Recreation Department. And I'm here to talk today about Thornmint, which is a rare plant, San Diego Thornmint as a matter of fact, which is a rare plant that exists here in San Diego and almost nowhere else. It's super special. So I'm going to talk about that and talk about our preserves and talk about our rare plant program and how we monitor our rare plants and how we keep track of them year after year. So I have a little PowerPoint presentation I'd like to share with you guys today, kind of give you a little insight into what it is that we do at the City of San Diego and our Parks and Rec Department and our Open Space Division. So what is a natural resource manager? Well, as you can see, I get to be outside a lot. I wear a lot of different hats. Sometimes I'm a senior planner. Sometimes I'm a senior staff member and involved in a lot of important projects around the city and planning those for future use. I'm a supervisor. I supervise some amazing staff, a couple amazing biologists and some interns that work for us that just produce amazing work, botanists and biologists and vernal pool specialists. It's really special, the coworkers that I get to work with. And I also get to be a field biologist, which is one of the greatest things about my job, is I get to be in some of the meetings where these decisions are made, but I also get to be out in the field identifying plants on my hands and knees and really letting my inner plant geek shine. And that's something that really I absolutely love about this position. And sometimes I'm a real estate broker. We are constantly looking at acquiring new properties, managing the properties that we have, and all different kinds of things that go along with that. But today I get to do my absolutely favorite part of my job, and that's to educate and advocate for our open spaces and our rare plants and rare animals and the special place that is San Diego open space. And I do have to make a disclaimer here that not all natural resource managers can create rainbows out of their fingers, but I'm a lucky one. So one of the things we're going to talk about today is our multi-species conservation program and a little bit about our rare plant monitoring. We're going to talk about what is it? What is the MSCP? We call it MSCP. Why do we monitor rare plants? Why do we want to preserve these special plants and animals? How do we do it? How do we keep track of all these things? And finally, where exactly do we look at? And where do we go? And in order to get we're going to dive into this a little bit deeper. Let's talk about San Diego. I know we have a lot of folks here from San Diego, but we may have some folks that are not from San Diego. So I want to give them a little bit of a tour around our city. This is the city of San Diego. As you can see, it's all spread out here. And every one of those gray dots out there is one of our open space preserves. You can see they stretch all the way up to Escondido. Here's the San Diego Zoo, Safari Park up here, some of our reservoirs, and the headwaters of the Tijuana River out here, and all the ways down. This is the border with San Diego and Mexico down here. So we have a large population of about 1.3 million people in the city of San Diego, and about 3 million people in the county. So it's quite a few people that get to enjoy these places. Oop, I went to the wrong way. Pardon me. So what is our multiple species conservation program? In 1997, we got together, before my time here at the city, people got together and realized that we needed to do something to conserve our special places, our special plants, our animals, these threatened and endangered species that we're losing ground to development. And one of those species that really helped bring this to the forefront was this little bird right here. Some people call it the bird that saved the West. That's a coastal California gnatcatcher. About the size of a little bit bigger than a ping pong ball, but this bird has a lot of charismatic features to it and made people care about it. And that's what I'm here to do today. I want you to care about our rare plants. I want you to care about our open spaces. So I'm trying to bring a little bit of my job to you so you can kind of understand what it is we do and maybe bring it a little bit closer to you so you can care about it as well. But our MSCP, again, it's a federal conservation plan. It also has state aspects into it. We call it a Natural Communities Conservation Plan here in California. And then part of this multiple species conservation program, we have a vernal pool habitat conservation plan. Now, we won't get into vernal pools too much today, but vernal pools are these special, very special seasonal wetlands here in San Diego that have an amazing abundance of life during the wet parts of the year, and then in the dry parts of the year, they really dry up and there's nothing there. But if you went out to see them, we just got some really nice rain this last week. If you went out to see our vernal pool preserves right now, I'm sure that many of them will be growing bright green and there'd be a ton of life in those pools. And if you went to see them at the end of September or October, they would just look like brown divots in the dirt. So life comes out of almost everywhere here in San Diego, which is super special because we're in a semi-arid environment. So our wetlands and our species and our habitats are all adapted to that, which is really special, which is why we need to save it. We need to conserve it. But here's some of the things that we do as part of why we do it. We want to ensure the long-term viability and sustainability of our native ecosystem function. And that is through a process, we protect our existing and restored biological resources. You know, many, we try to protect them from really intense disturbing activities, and areas adjacent to them, we also try to limit the amount of activities that are happening in those areas too, so they don't have kind of what we call an edge effect. One other thing we like to do, I mean, this is a whole list, so I'm not going to read all of these, but you can see them. You know, we like to facilitate the monitoring of selected target species. So that means every year we go out and look at some of these areas and see how they're doing, and we compare that to the next year. And so my predecessors and people before me had the great idea to start doing this over 20 years ago now. And before it was even part of our MSCP, the city of San Diego took it upon itself to monitor a lot of our rare plants and animals across the city. And that was something very, very groundbreaking at the time. And so we can look back now, and in some cases, we have data that runs back 25, 30 years on these locations, so we can compare it year after year and see what's happening there. One of the other things that really our program provides for us is the ability to be flexible in management. What are we going to do here? Well, a lot of times, there's projects that dictate exactly what you have to do. Well, we have the opportunity to kind of be adaptive with that management. Adapt to changing environments and circumstances and changes in use patterns and all these different things. But it's something that really, this is a framework that allows us to manage our open spaces and allows us to preserve and protect those animals and plants that live there. So how do we monitor our rare plants? Well, it used to be we would sit out in the field with books and notepads and we would write everything down, and we would have to take those notes or those field sheets back to the office and transpose them into a PDF or some other type of electronic device, and then we can analyze that. Now, some of our great staffers have developed what we call a digital data collection techniques using our phones. Everybody's got a phone in their pocket, right? So now we use the phone as a work device, not just a play device or not just to keep track of our friends and family. We use it as a conservation tool, which is something really cool. And I almost guarantee you that when the first iPhone came out, no one was looking at it and thinking, this is going to be the next big conservation tool. But guess what? It is. We use it constantly. My iPhone is in my pocket when I'm in the field every day, whether it's to record an activity that we just did in the field, to record a special plant species, or just to take a picture and upload it to iNaturalist, which if you haven't gotten into iNaturalist, check it out. It's an amazing, they're not paying me to say that, but it's amazing. It's just a great app on your phone. You can take a picture of something and it can help scientists like myself determine what's there, what may be there, what someone else has seen, because we can't be everywhere all the time, right? So how do we monitor our rare plants? Well, we have like I said, we have our phones. And so we have a phone survey that comes up on our phone where we look at the plot, where we go out and we have a GPS point located right here at a location where we know exactly where we're looking at. We take a photo and the same angle every year. And then we have a plot around us that's about 30 meters around, 15 meters in each direction. And we count all of the plants in that area, all of our rare plants. And we do an assessment of that area. We count all of the plant species. And then we analyze how much space each one of those plant species is taking up. And we identify if it's a non-native species, if it's an invasive species, if it's a native species, or if it is a non-native again. So, but we collect all this data. Look here, there's data for days, and all this data comes in, and it gets to be very onerous, and it's hard to work with. But this program now, instead of bringing it all back, typing it all up, putting it into Excel, then analyzing it to Excel, our program called Survey 123, it's from the Esri group, who does a lot of the mapping and geospatial technology for planning and whatnot. They have this amazing program, and it allows us to record data in a very, very efficient way, and then takes that data and allows us to analyze it and look at it over a year. And we'll get into some more of the details of all that in a little bit. But this is how we do it. So, and where we do it. Where do we monitor our plants? We really have a lot of different places we monitor our plants, but our preserve system is in total, about 51,000 acres, which is huge. And if you consider our lakes and reservoirs we have that our Public Utilities Department manages in the eastern part of the county, all the way into Mission Trails, which is one of the largest urban parks in the world. It's a little over 8,000 acres, and it is probably, I think, the 8th largest urban park in the United States, which also is great because it encompasses endangered species and trails and trail miles. And we have, like I said, we can see here, we have like 27,000 acres of open space available for people to go and recreate in. Passive recreation, bicycling, and horseback riding in some trails, and hiking, of course, and walking, and bird watching. All these are really great opportunities to get out into our preserve system and see the special plants and animals that San Diego has. In fact, at 27,000 acres, we're nearly, or at 51,000 acres, we're over the size of many of our national parks. You can see there down at the bottom, there's several of your favorite national parks actually have less property than we have as the city of San Diego, which I always think is cool. In fact, another great fact about this is that the city of San Diego has the second largest urban preserve in the United States. We're only slightly behind Juneau, Alaska. And Juneau, Alaska, good job for you guys, because you had the forethought to preserve a lot of land within your city limits. So we're creeping up on you. Hopefully someday we'll get there. So where do we monitor? We monitor about 65 or so rare plant occurrences across the city of San Diego and out in our open spaces in the eastern part of the county. All of these are on the map here, and you can see they're all over this city. They're almost everywhere. We have some right where in some of our busiest parks in the city of San Diego. Mission Bay has a population of rare plants. I'm not going to tell you where, but they're there. And they're beautiful plants, and they are adapted to living in coastal dune situations, which Mission Bay has. A lot of people think of as a playground, but it's also a very, very important place for wild plants and animals. So here's a list of the rare plants that we get to monitor. Today we're going to be talking about this first one on the list. This is San Diego Thornmint. Acanthomintha ilicifolia. It's a mouthful, I know. But some of the other plants that we get to monitor are some plants that live nowhere else in the world except for here in San Diego. We have a few of these little Dudleas, which if you guys, I know that Dudlea doesn't mean much to most folks, but if you've heard of succulents, these are our native succulents. Dudlea brevifolia is a tiny little guy. It only grows about an inch or so tall, and it lives in only about 3 or 4 places in the entire world. And most of those places are in our city of San Diego preserves. So we have a very big duty to protect those plants for not just me and for our city, but for the entire global population. which I think is really it's a really special thing to have here in our city. And so we'll dig down deeper and let's talk about what's going on in Mission Trails. So we have a lot of different areas in Mission Trails that we look at every year to monitor our rare plants out there. We have several different species that we monitor, including our San Diego Thornmint. We have a plant called the San Diego Golden Star. Again, these are plants that live almost nowhere else except for here in San Diego, which is really, really special. And so one of the things why are we preserving these plants? Why do we want to take the time to, if the plant's not going to survive on its own, why do we need to give it a helping hand, so to speak? And one of the important things to know is that this is the entire range of our plants here, the San Diego Thornmint. This here in San Diego County, a little bit down in Baja California, where we have a few populations, but in overall, the entire population of this plant lives within the county of San Diego or within a few miles of the coast down in Baja. And so while we're looking to try to preserve and protect these plants, one of the really important things we need to do is kind of understand where they're coming from, where the genetics are, how their genetics and their genes are interplayed with each other, like how they're related, how is each population related to the next. And then if we understand that, we can use the best data to make sure that those plants and animals, as we understand their genes better, we can make sure that we keep genetic diversity broad and we can allow for as we need to adapt to climate change, our plants and animals also need to adapt to climate change. And having a greater genetic variability in that community is really, really going to be beneficial for those plants and animals. And so as we go to restore those populations, we want to look at where those genes are coming from and make sure that if the gene is something that's not desirable, or it's just we're seeing that it's not been productive in the field, or there's something like, so each one of these plants, a lot of them have very specific micro-adaptations to live in the areas they do. So if you took plants from the Simon Preserve up in North County in Ramona, and you brought them down here to Dennery Canyon in Otay Mesa in the southern part of the city, they might not do as well because those microclimates are so much different. And those plants are adapted to living in those areas where they have those micro adaptations and that micro development of their adaptations to be able to live there successfully and succeed and breed. And one of the really important things that we've done in the past is we've partnered with conservation experts. Now, I'm a plant geek, I'm a bird geek, I'm a fish geek. I love being out in nature. In fact, my wife, most people have the swear jar at home. My wife has a jar sitting on our counter that says, identifying plants when no one asked. The jar is full. So, that's something that, it allows to talk to you guys today, really allows me to kind of let that inner plant geek shine. So I really appreciate that. But again, genetics are really important for our plants because of these micro adaptations and making sure. So how do we find this out? Well, we know really smart people, thankfully. We partner with great folks, scientists at the U.S. Geological Survey. We have conservationists at the Institute of Conservation Research, at San Diego Zoo Global and the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance. We have these partners that allow us to bring them into our program. And we partner with them, and what the San Diego Zoo has done is they've gone to some of these sites, they've collected seed. And they've collected small amounts of seed from each one of these mother plants. And in each one of these mother plants, they bring that seed back to their shops up in Escondido area, and they'll grow out those plants from the seed. And then from those plants that were grown from that seed, we can take all of the seed from those plants rather than, because those aren't wild plants. Those are plants that seed may have been wasted or been eaten by a bird or a mouse or something like that at some point down the line. But we're taking about 10% of that seed out of the field, we're taking it up to the safari park, and they're growing it in their greenhouses. And in their greenhouses, they could take all of the seed from each one of those mother plants, and they know the genes, they know the genetics of that plant. So they can say, we want to continue this gene line, we don't want to continue this gene line because it wasn't successful. These plants didn't fertilize correctly or whatever. It's a lot of detail that goes into this. And I won't get into all the details of it, but I will say this, that it is very, very labor intensive. Sorting, some of these seeds are, you'll see later, very, very small. And they're very difficult to sort, and then let alone get them to come up and sprout every year. But as they come up and sprout, then we can fertilize them, and then we can make sure that we get the seed from there, and then we create a bank, a seed bank, or seed bulking, where we bulk those seeds and we put them in a safe place so that if something were to happen to one of these locations out here, we have the seeds and we have that same genetic line. We can go to the bank and say, Institute for Conservation Research, we need your help again. We have a population that is failing and we need to get some of these genes back into the gene pool. So we look at, and I reach out to our smart partners at USGS and all these partner organizations across the California Native Plant Society and all these experts, the Natural History Museum, we're all involved with this in a regional conservation group, we'll call it, to preserve these plants, to preserve their genetic legacy. And that's important for the plants that live there, the animals that live there, and it's important for us as people. We don't think of a small annual plant that grows a foot high as being important to us. But as we all know, plants are very important to us. Plants can give us medicine, they can give us food. So we always want to make sure that we preserve that life across our spaces. So as we're looking, and this is going to get really into the nerdy parts of it, you can see there's a lot of, each one of these populations down here has all these different factors in it. There's the genetic diversity of each single population, the number of alleles that are the same, and what amount of interbreeding and relatedness is going on in there. So a colleague of ours at the USGS has done the really difficult work of mapping all this stuff. And what it means to us, this looks, for people that aren't in genetics and genetic research, this may not look like much, but what this really gives us is it gives us a roadmap. Which populations are related to each other? Which populations do we want to bring together? And which populations we want to make sure that we keep apart? And so this is what we call it. This is a heat map. And all the darker spots are where these populations are the most, the light color represents a low genetic differentiation, and then the dark color, that says these are very, very similar areas and very, very similar populations. So you can, we can download this at a later time if you really want it. We can get it. But the U.S. Geological Survey is the holder of this. San Diego Maintenance and Monitoring and Management Program, SDMMP.org, is also a really good place to go to get research and really dive into some of this stuff if you really want to dive into it deep. I won't get too much deeper into it. But as you can see, when we did a genetic test on this, all these little areas start to play out, right? So everything in blue is more closely related to the other blue parts, and then purple, and then pink and green and orange. But you see there's some of these areas where it's like, okay, well, how did that get there, right? But before we did all this genetic testing, we weren't really sure sometimes where these plants were coming from. And now we have that information. So we can make those determinations about, if we collect a plant from here, we're going to put it back in that area, or one very similar to it, and not, or if we need to introduce some genetic variation into a population, we can take one of these populations from outside and bring that in to add some genetic variation to that population. Now this stuff is done at a very, very high level, above me in the research labs and of the U.S. Geological Survey, and like I said, a lot of our partners out there doing the hard work. We're out there on the ground trying to find out where we need to restore things, how we need to restore them, and why. So we're seeing why we need to restore them is because we have a lot of pressures on these plants. A lot of our native plants have trails and invasive weeds and dogs and all kinds of stuff and development to issues and climate change. So there's all these bombardments on them. And our rare plants are really kind of that classic underdog story. Is like they were just on top and they were very in their little niche. So our San Diego Thornmint is really a great success story here because we've been monitoring these locations for, like I said, 20 years some places, and we noticed about 3 or 4 years ago that one of our populations and several of our populations wasn't doing so well. And we look back at our monitoring data and we say, okay, why isn't it doing so well? Well, you'll see here in a bit, it's pretty evident. Non-native grasses really compete a lot of times in these areas. This is a plant, the San Diego Thornmint is a plant that really loves clay soils, really sticky, cracky soils that dry up really fast, but also retain a lot of moisture in the springtime. Or they don't dry up fast, they dry up really in the winter, or in the fall, I should say. But by winter time, they're getting more water, they're getting more vegetation growing on them, so they're kind of expanding a little bit. But we call it a clay lens, where it's like a shallow depression of clay and water pools there. And these plants are specialists there. They love that type of soil. In fact, almost all of our species, almost all these locations of plants are on south or southeast facing hills with a gentle slope. So it's very specific. So you have this very specific plant that lives in a very specific area that needs some help because it's not used to competing, because there's not when it grew for the last 50, 100,000, 200,000 years, it didn't have that competition. So now that we have introduced those species and introduced some impacts like trails and human uses in those areas, we want to make sure that we're going to preserve these plants for my kids, the kids, and grandkids, and everybody who comes down the pipe. So we're going to talk a little bit about a success story about how we were able to secure some grant funding from our partners at SANDAG, which is the San Diego Association of Governments. They put out a grant every few years to really kind of focus their money on these restoration efforts. So we got a grant, or I should say the Mission Trails Park Foundation got a grant. They partnered with us at Open Space, and also we brought in a consultant called RECON Environmental to help us really kind of focus our efforts on these sites. And so we have 6 occurrences of San Diego Thornmint in our open space that we manage. In Mission Trails Regional Park, also in Dennery Canyon, which is down in Otay Mesa, the Los Penasquitos Preserve up in the north part of San Diego, Lusardi Open Space, which again is up in the northern part of San Diego, the Otay Lakes, and again down in Otay, just south of San Diego Reservoir there, and then Sabre Springs Open Space, which is again in the eastern part of Los Penasquitos Canyon. So all over the place. So to preserve this plant, what did we do? We started, in about 2015. We've always been managing these areas, but we really tried to really focus about 2015 to really take an active measure on how we address native or non-native species in these areas. And so we started doing some weed treatments in 2015. It wasn't as effective for us. We saw some rises in the native plant population or non-native plant population. So we decided that as a group, let's see what we can do to try to help this plant out. So we applied for a grant, and we won. Or I should say the Park Foundation won, but we, as a team, we'll call it a win, right? So we got a TransNet grant, and it was for about $72,000. Which seems like a lot of money, but when you space that out over 3 years, and with the amount of labor and the work that we really had to do there, it really, we had to be very efficient with our spending our funds, and we had to really make sure that we were doing a good job of expending those funds in the correct way. So we brought on partners, of course, and one of those partners, was the San Diego Zoo, and we talked about their efforts to bulk and collect seed for us. And I'm just going to take a little drink here. And so RECON Environmental, also we brought them on. They're experts. They have some of the greatest native plant botanists that I've worked with, that I've been very lucky to work with. And they were able to help us address our needs and develop a program to help restore the population of these plants. And some of that stuff involved, I mean, we're talking intensive weed control, people sometimes on their hands and knees pulling weeds out by hand because they were in such sensitive areas. Like you can see these little tiny seedlings over there. That soil crack is only about a ½ inch wide, so that seedling is no more than an inch total. So you can see how small they are, but they can be affected really badly by our non-native species that come in and kind of take over before they have a chance to really succeed. So in 2018, we put up 2 cages, and in those cages we wanted to make sure that we excluded all the bunnies and jackrabbits and voles and gophers as much as we could to give these plants an extra head start. Just like that underdog story I was talking about earlier, those plants really needed a little boost. And so we decided to put them in a cage, essentially, a small, we call it an Herbivory Exclusion cage, which again keeps those birds and things like that from really getting in there to eat the seedlings. So we put up 3 of those areas, one where we didn't do anything, and the other 2s where we put in plants, and we put in a lot of about 1,800 seeds, I think it was. About 1,800 seeds. And then we just continued maintenance, and then we got to COVID last spring. We were just about at the end of things, and here in San Diego, we had a really, really dry February last year. In fact, I don't think it rained hardly at all in February. So we had a lot of rain in December, not a lot of rain in January, and then a lot of rain no rain in February, and then a lot of rain in the end of March, April, and May. So there was these 2 months where these seedlings had started to grow with all the rain, and then we had really dry spell. And so we looked at it, and our group looked together and said, what are we going to do? And this was right in the middle of March last year, almost exactly to the day. We got together as a group and said, what do we need to do to help these plants? And what we came up with was, we're going to water them. Well, they're native plants. They should be able to survive on their own without supplemental watering. But because everything was so new, and we've put a lot of effort and time into protecting these plants, we want to make sure we're doing everything we can to give them the head start that they need. So we did some supplemental watering, and you can see some of our staff, the staff at RECON. You can see there. Look at how small these seeds are. Those things you could barely see. I mean, they're the size of a grain of sand almost. But collecting them and placing them gently in these exclusion areas, you can see we put in some rocks for the microhabitat and microshade and whatnot. We're really thoughtful about this whole thing. And again, thanks to RECON, because they have the technology, they have the experience, and they really did a great job for us out there. And as do many consultants that we work with. But this project was very special to us because it's a rare plant, and it's a rare opportunity to work with a rare plant that's federally threatened, and it's endangered here in California, and it's very, very limited in its range. So we want to make sure that we keep it around. And you can see the number of staff that are out there to water these plants. You see these guys, because of the success of this project, we started seeing seedlings outside of these areas, and we started seeding outside of those areas. So we're outside of those exclusion areas, and and we're planting plants, but we can't drag the hose across them. You drag a hose across them, you can kill these small little seeds or seedlings that are, just a ½ inch or an inch tall. So we want to be very, very careful and very gentle and delicate when we're looking at these areas. And one of our, this is a great kind of explanation here of what we're looking at. So this is our spot in Mission Trails where we did our restoration. This blue line on the big blue line on the outside here was in 2001 when we did our rare plant surveys. We looked at this and we said, okay, here's where in the early 90s, we thought the plants were here. So that's where we put our dot. And we said, all right, from here, we're gonna look out 30 meters, or 30 feet on either side, or 15 meters on either side, and look and see what we're doing. And what we saw was that the plants were here, but in 2001, the plants really liked this area, the blue area. They really thought like this was where we wanted to be. But we kept our monitoring point there, and then we continued to monitor this every single year. And you can see year after year, things started to dwindle, and dwindle and dwindle, and things weren't really looking great for us. 2018, 2017, and then 2019 we see, so in 2018, here's where we were first, I apologize, I'm pressing the wrong button. So in 2017, these are where we had plants that showed up first. This is where we had historically seen them, and this is where we've been seeing them for year after year. 2018, that area got a little bit smaller even. And then late 2018, we said, you know what, let's expand our area. And this is where we put those 2 exclusion devices here, exclusionary fences, and that's where we put our seeds. And so we wanted to see, okay, how many plants can we get? So we count them every year. We count each individual plant throughout the whole extent of this project. And so as part of our monitoring, we have to keep an eye on the other plants as well. So in where we did our monitoring at our sample point here, see right here, at our sample point here, this is our data from last year. We looked at it from April of 2020. So I apologize, it's a 10-meter radius. Sarah Allen, my botanist, she's gonna kill me for saying that. So, but anyway, sorry, Sarah. It's 10-meter radius, thank you. But we had to look at that in that sample plot, okay? So we found 15 plants in the sample plot last year, which was great. But what else did we find there? A lot of invasive species. Bare ground, and then some non-native species, should say, is actually very low. We had a lot of bare ground out there, which is what this plant really likes. You can see the exclusion devices did a really good job over here, keeping all of the bunnies from mowing everything down. But as you can see here, this line of plants, we had to actually control some of these because these are also native plants, but they were actually crowding out some of our non-native plants, or our special native plants, excuse me. So what it looked like in 2020 was that, wow, if you go from where we were at in 2019 to those little yellow dots down there at the bottom to where we're at in 2020, we expanded quite a bit. And that is in direct correlation to the attention and the efforts that the Park Foundation, RECON, and the ranger staff all gave to this area, and our botany and biology staff at the city also gave this area a lot of attention. A lot of resources went into protecting these plants, and that grant money that we got from the SANDAG really helped put this project over the edge and really helped it be successful. And so how successful were we? Well, in 2020 again, in our entire mapped extent, we counted 782 plants, which is quite a big increase over the previous years. As you can see, in the previous years, these are all of our plant populations, our rare San Diego Thornmint populations across the city. And you can see the black or the dark in the back here is our rainfall. And there was a lot of correlation with the plant's success and rainfall. And then, but it also, when we have a lot of rain, we also have a lot of weeds. So that's something that you'll see here in this next slide, is our non-native cover. So when we're looking at these areas, non-native cover is the amount of cover. If you were to hover above the site and you look down on something, how much of the ground could you see, and how much of each plant could you see? Well, here in 2014, it was about 50% of that cover was non-native plants. And you can see the Thornmint really suffered there. Hardly any plants were found in 2014. But then in 2015, we had a nice a little bit bigger rain year, and the plants kind of expressed themselves better. And then 2016, we don't have a lot of rain. Again, non-native plants don't do as well, but the native plants also don't do as well. And you can kind of see this correlation of rain and plants and everything until about 2018, where you see we're at a pretty low point for both rain and plant count. But luckily, we're also at a pretty low point for our non-native species that really compete for those resources. So as we can see, this is the upward trajectory we're on right now. Almost 800 plants here from back in 2018, where we were down less. I think we counted about 65, 70 plants. And that's total, all the way up to in 2020, where we counted nearly 800, which in my book is a huge win, and especially for this population. It's been had historically pretty low numbers, not really over 500 in those large extents. So it's really great to see those populations kind of explode like that. So what are some of our next steps? What are some of the things that we can do next time to really kind of keep an eye on these plants and make sure that we don't get down there? Well, we can do annual weed control, of course, but we're going to really kind of engage, again, our help from our staff and our rangers and everybody, and do the weed control out there. You know, sometimes, like I said, it's mechanical control, where we go out there and weed whip some areas, or maybe it's even hand pulling weeds. In a very rare case, we'll use herbicide if we need to, but we use it in a very smart and efficient way, and we use it in a process called integrated pest management, which uses the very least damaging thing to get the toolbox. So it's just herbicide is just one tool in our toolbox, and it's an important tool, but it's not our only tool. And we like to use all those tools before we get to that point. So this is something that we like to engage our volunteers in. And as you know, we've had since in the past year, we haven't been able to have our volunteers out to our parks and preserves, and those people that give so much of themselves to our parks and preserves is devastating to see them on the sidelines really trying to get back in there. But you know, we're working hard with our city administration to get that back on track here, and hopefully, as everybody is getting their vaccines and everything, that we'll get our volunteers back in the parks, and that kind of identifies some of the things that we want to do next. Some of the future things is an opportunity called a site steward. You know, it's this engagement with the people and the folks that are there, and it's like, I want someone to take control over this site, that a volunteer that really can be out there every day, or can be out there twice a week. You know, we manage 28,000 acres of property, and I have a staff of 5 people, including myself. So we're spread really, really thin. Our rangers are spread really, really thin. All the things that they're doing. We've had 20% or so increase in users over the past year, which is great. More people that we can get out in our preserves and explore and really kind of bring them closer to nature. But it puts a really big burden on our rangers. So they're cleaning up a lot more trash, and they're engaging with a lot more folks on a day-to-day basis. So it's really important if you're out there in the preserves, pick up your trash, pick up your everything that you have with you. You pack it in, pack it out. That's my ethos here. So, and kind of in closing, I wanted to show these are some of the areas that we look at. I was just out there this weekend with my wife. Went to take a look at some of our areas to see how they're doing. This area in particular was one that we left go. So we had a native population of plants there, but we wanted to see how they would do. It's our control, so to speak. So we wanted to see how they would do if we just let them be. Well, I can tell you, we're seeing a lot of the little guys starting to pop up now, which is really exciting. And we've had some really good rain this past week, so I'm hoping that, you know, if I go out there in another week or two, I'll see even more of these plants out there. So it really brings me a lot of joy to be able to share this kind of project with you and share this success of this project with the folks here across the universe or wherever the YouTube is out. But I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this because I love plants, and it's important because they don't have an advocate. I want to be that advocate for them. I want to be that conduit that allows you to care about plants. People that don't normally care about plants. I want you to care about plants as much as I do. And not because you need to, it's because you should. It's because it's the right thing. You know, they're living things, they're special, and they're native to San Diego. And that's what makes it special, even more special to me, is like these plants they're adapted to living here, and they're not adapted to dealing with all these foreign invaders that coming from, you know, Central Asia or Australia, all these nasty invasive weeds. So we want to give them a heads up and our hand up and really help them succeed. But again, it's just a huge thank you to Jennifer and the folks at the Mission Trails Regional Park Foundation, our partners at SANDAG and RECON Environmental, the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance, Institute of Conservation Research, of course our Mission Trails Ranger staff who are just absolutely amazing. They're out there every day interacting with the public and just being the wildlife heroes for everybody. And of course, I can't thank our volunteers enough. In 2020, we only had about 2,000 hours of volunteer work, and that was from the early parts of the month. Early parts of the year. If you compare that with the year previous, we had almost 30,000 hours of volunteer work in our parks and preserves in 2019. And you compare that and contrast it to where we're at now, and you can see that's a lot of missed opportunity there. But I can tell you that my staff, our ranger staff, my boss's bosses, we're committed to preserving these areas and preserving these plants. And it's really something that we want to engage the public in. And when it's safe to have everybody back, we welcome you guys in open arms. And I really hope that you'll come and visit Mission Trails, come and visit, spend your time there, explore the wonderful trails, the history, the native people's, the native people exhibits that, once we get everything back opened again. But I really, really thank everybody. I think we may have some questions coming in here at some point, so I think I'm open for questions now. All right, so Autumn. Hey, Autumn. I live near Barker entrance of Coles Mountain, sorry. And we've been restoring my yard with California native plants over the past 5 years. Is there a way I can help with the thornmint restoration? Well, actually, Autumn, there is a way you can help with thornmint restoration. One of the greatest things you can do as a citizen scientist is produce a pollinator garden, because all of our native plants require pollinators, bees, flies, and wasps, and butterflies, and all these different little hummingbirds. So if you create a place for native plants to thrive in your backyard, all those small little bugs and animals that create our ecosystem are going to thrive there. So that's a great question. Thanks, Autumn. All right. Kathy B., what are the boxes protecting in the east part of the grassland trails area? Oh, the boxes protecting in the east part of the grasslands trail area. That is a good question. I'll have to get back to you on that. I don't know if I'm thinking about the same thing. I don't want to misspeak about that. So I think we'll have to come back to Kathy. All right. Mark James, what or who determines a plant is rare and worth restoration? Very, very good point, Mark. Well, Well, that's a group of regional conservation biologists like myself, our colleagues at the zoo, the San Diego Management and Monitoring Program, U.S. Geological Survey, and the Natural History Museum, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, California Department of Fish and Wildlife. All these folks join together in a group, a regional working group, and we look at our plants and we say, all right, so of all the plants that we're monitoring, which plants need the most help? Which ones are we seeing on a steep decline? Which ones are we seeing that are doing better? And we don't need to monitor them every year because they're doing pretty well. But we need to focus our time on those. So we get a group together, about 40 or 50 people sometimes, back before the virus and everything. We get together and really kind of work this stuff out together and say, what's worth our time? You know, is a plant, is it too far gone? Well, I don't think there's any too far gone plants yet. You know, we're still discovering plants too. Just in this past year, we rediscovered a plant we thought was extinct for 100 years. I won't say we, some of our colleagues at the Natural History Museum had discovered this plant, and it may have been hiding in plain sight all along. So we work together as a group. It's not me, and it's not my colleagues at USGS that make this decision. It's a lot of different people that end up making these decisions. But a lot of it does revolve around the ranking for the California Native Plant Society. Will rank plants based on their rarity and scarcity. U.S. Fish and Wildlife will also do the same with the Endangered Species Program, whether or not it reaches the threshold of a threatened or endangered plant. And then also the California Department of Fish and Wildlife also determines whether those plants maybe need to go on a special list to be protected even more. So it's a collaborative effort across the city, federal, everybody. Oh, Bethany Ems, is there a comprehensive list of the rare plants in the San Diego area? There is. We have quite a few of these. Actually, if you go onto the San Diego SDMMP website, you can go into their portal, they call it, and you can look at all the rare plants that we monitor as part of our regional conservation group, and we monitor plants all over the county. And we have some really special plants that exist, again, almost nowhere else. And so if you go to that website, you can really take a deep dive into there and really let your inner plant geek out and just get in there and explore. And there's papers about plants, and there is maps, and there are presentations. There's all different kinds of stuff. So that's a great question, Bethany. Thank you for bringing that up. All right. Pat Ray says, all right, I'd like a resource for identifying native versus invasive plants when they're itty bitty before they're a big plant. Yeah, Pat, me too. The hardest thing about plants, I think, is when they come up at the same time and they have those first two different non-differentiated leaves on them, the first cotyledon leaves. Those are really, really difficult to tell apart. A lot of what you can look at is by the habit of that plant. All right, so if you're looking down on the ground and you see maybe one or two of these tiny little plants and then a sea of other plants, you can probably bet that those one or two little plants is probably not a native plant, especially in some of our more impacted areas. Now, if you go out to our vernal pool preserves, you could see the exact opposite, where you could see a tiny little invasive plant surrounded by a sea of native plants. But those areas are few and far between in our county, and that's what we're trying to increase more and more, is remove those non-native plants and make room for our native plants. But there's not really a great key out there that I've found yet to see when they're really little bitty. And what I can say is doing a little experiment. Allow one to grow, and see what it looks like. And once you get those first two leaves, once it starts differentiating a little bit more, you get 4, 5, 6 leaves on it. Usually can be able to tell some of the identifying factors with those plants. So, but good question, Pat. All right, J.R. Trout. Is there an update on the Sabre Springs plot? I met Sarah Allen by chance. Oh, good for you. I remember her telling me about this. You met Sarah Allen by chance on the site and discussed the Thornmint, but that was before COVID. Still willing to help and I think your question got cut off, but you're willing to help. That is awesome. That is the kind of the attitude that we need to have. And Sarah's, she hasn't forgot about you, I promise you. She's actually talked to me about that and how we can engage people. And that's one of the things I really want to do too, is engage people in our rare plant program to have them, again, care about these plants. And the more people care, the closer they can get to them and closer they can kind of understand and have a little bit of knowledge about the plants, the more they really kind of care and see how special they are. So we'll get back to you, JR, I promise. And once we get kind of our rare plant, we haven't quite kicked off yet this year. We're doing some management activities out there, obviously because of the rain. We have to go out and take a look at things and see if there's any erosion or whatnot. But certainly something that we're looking into, and having partners in the community, especially folks that are nearby, that's just key because you're our conduit into that site. So thanks, JR, and I thank you for meeting Sarah out there. I know she had great things to say about your conversation, so thank you. Oh, Jay Hicks, all right. Based on the success of your control areas, is there a plan to reintroduce these native species and increase their range? Excellent question, Jay. Yes, that is our eventual goal, because we've identified some spots in Mission Trails already that would be candidate sites for a restoration effort. Places where we've seen thornmint historically, places that have the right soils. These are all great candidate sites that have the right kind of south-facing slope and the right type of clay and mafic soils, they call them sometimes. So if we're looking at those places, we're identifying those through soil surveys, through vegetation surveys that happen on a pretty regular basis through the park. So we're looking at those areas to see, like, okay, I've already got one in mind. And doing some research for this presentation, I came across a monitoring book from 1995 that showed a population of thornmint not that far away from the one that we did our restoration on. And in 1995, there was 300 plants there. And now we can't find the spot. It's been covered by invasive weeds or whatnot. So we're going to go back out there, try to find that spot, and give it some control, weed control, and see really what's going to come up there. See what happens, and then maybe that's going to be our next opportunity for a grant. Oh, Deanna Brand. What is the native plant? What native plant is the biggest threat to thornmint? Ooh, that's a good question. I think I'd have to say the biggest threat to thornmint at our site we had there was our tar plant. And it was a fasciculated tar plant, I believe. But it is a very aggressive native plant that looks beautiful. If you drive through Otay Lakes or some of those places, you may see them. They're bright yellow flowers. They kind of grow about knee high. But we had to control some of those in that site because they started to take over. So great question, Deanna. Great to see you out here. All right. Christina DeKaler. I see Jimson weed in Mission Trails. Is this a native plant? Yes. So there's a lot of I would say controversy on the native plant. Like I do believe it's a natural. They call it a naturalized plant, but it is native, I think, to the United States. And there is a native version out here in San Diego in California. I am not sure that it's always the native version that we're seeing out there, but it is a native plant of San Diego, and it is a native plant of California. All right. That's it. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. I really, really appreciate the time. And get out there and enjoy your open spaces. Enjoy your preserves. No matter where you are, enjoy your nature. And thank you again so very, very much.